Into the Shadowlands is my favorite supplement for Shadowdark, and I liked it so much that I asked Jake House from House DM to come to the Dire Den and tell us all about it. So this is that interview. We discussed a lot of the design concepts that he used in Into the Shadowlands, and it's a really great discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Unfortunately, halfway through the conversation, my internet crashed, and I didn't lose anything, thankfully. But the latter half of the interview, the video quality is very poor. But the audio content is still there. You still hear the whole interview. And I think it still was worth putting out there for you guys to see because it was a really great discussion with House. And stay with it to the end because House gives us a reveal of what his next project is going to be. And I'm pretty excited about that too. We also got into a really great discussion about the game Shadowdark and the design principles behind it and all the things that Shadowdark can be used for and what we think the internet gets wrong about Shadowdark. So stay tuned and subscribe for that video coming out in the next few days. In the meantime, here's House and Into the Shadowlands. So welcome to Dire Den. I'm Brad Wolf, and I'm here with House DM. And House has an awesome YouTube channel with all sorts of crafting videos for all your handmade D&D terrain and miniatures, and then a ton of great advice on Dungeons and Dragons and now Shadowdark. So that's what we're talking about today is Into the Shadowlands. So House, tell us a little bit about this product of yours.
Yeah. Well, first off, Brad, thanks for having me on your little podcast, your show here. Into the Shadowlands is basically a third-party supplement for Shadowdark RPG by the Arcane Library. Basically came from like me trying to find a way to incorporate a little bit more options into my Shadowdark games. A lot of people kind of go against the whole like, don't like homebrew stuff right off the bat, play the game rules as written first, which I have done and is great. But I think I wanted a little bit more options right out the gate for my players. So that was me creating something for my homebrew game that I've been playtesting and working with my group, and it's been going great. And yeah, that's where the idea came from.
Cool. So most of this is born out of stuff that you were using at your table before you wrote the supplement.
Yes and no. Some of it was, how do we make a barbarian that's like a little bit more distinct from the fighter class? And then from there, I was like, oh, well, I should make a class for this. And like, there's not really a druid. There's a wizard in Shadowdark, but what would a druid look like? And what would my take be on that? So it's just me trying to pull out of my head as many classes and like spells from like other games like 5e, but shadow darkify it and try to keep it as close to Kelsey's like intended. Kelsey's the designer of Shadowdark.
Right.
As close to her like intention for creating the rules, which is tough. It's tough to do.
It is. I've been homebrewing some stuff for Shadowdark myself, and it's like, oh, wait a second. There's not different types of damage in Shadowdark, so there's not like a distinct like fire damage or cold damage, right? So that so like reworking some 5th edition spells into Shadowdark, I've been like, well, so what do I do to make this spell unique, right?
Yeah, that's one of the hard parts because it's Kelsey did such a good job of like really making spells that encompassed every aspect of aspects of role playing in a dungeon crawl that really harness on each piece in a really good way. So coming up with something that isn't already in the game in some way was definitely one of the challenges.
Yeah, for sure. So so you were kind of inspired to do this just because that's how your brain works. You're just like, I want to homebrew some stuff. Like that's what I do, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I've even in my first game ever, like we've always just done homebrewing stuff. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like my go-to. There's aspects of games where I'm like, I wish this was like this instead. And it's like, well, it's my game. Like,
right. Yeah.
This feels more fun and better. And as long as my players are like on board and cool with it, which they always are, then yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think that's the beauty of role-playing games in general, but I'm pretty sure that's how I found your channel originally. But because you had done some, here are my homebrew rules for 5th edition. You had a couple of videos about how you've made changes to 5th edition when you were playing that. So that's why I asked. It just seems like that's kind of like how your brain works. Like, no, I want to customize this. This is my kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm really trying to like hold my tongue on this because I have a video that I've been working on. Like it's fully scripted out, and the overall gist is I tried to create my own hacked version of fifth edition because that's really where I started with. And I did all of this work. Like it's a crazy large document where I like really tried to streamline 5e as much as possible. And then one day while looking for homebrew rules to change like an aspect of like how damage is dealt, which is another one of my videos where I talk about removing armor class and the hit rolls from your campaign. I stumbled upon Shadowdark and was like, ah, shoot. Wait, can I cuss on this? Is that fine? Oh shit. There's a game that already exists or is in the works that
Right.
basically did all of the things that I was trying to do and did it better. And I'm like, well, I'm just gonna throw that away and just go dive into Shadowdark. Like there's like this perspective of like you should try the game as it was originally intended by the creator of that. Cause I think there's this like level of like, oh, you're a game designer and you created this system and you should have the experience as intended by the creator of the game. And like that's
Mhm.
like one perspective, which is understandable because if they've really designed the game well enough, they've thought about each thing and how rules and mechanics interact with each other, and that's really important. But at the same time, you know, maybe you want to try to do something a specific way and the game doesn't quite lend itself to that, and it's hard to
Right.
tell without playing it first, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's where a lot of that perspective comes from, where it's like before you start making spells and before you start making classes for this game, try it first. You might find
Right.
you don't need to do all of that.
Right.
And I'm speaking from experience here as somebody who tried to like homebrew this whole thing for 5e and then was just like it didn't. I mean, I'll talk about that in the video. What happened? Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm of the camp of like try the game first and then make the adjustments. It'll save you time.
Yeah. Yeah, that I definitely agree with. Now, to kinda focus on your Into the Shadowlands, um, there's 9 different classes that you created, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Which is a lot compared to because the core game of Shadowdark, for those who don't know, only has 4 classes. So, like, 9, that's, you're more than double the core game when you add those. Um, so what was it like coming up with all those different classes for you? Like, what was the design experience?
I mean, coming up with them was pretty easy because you can just look at 5e and be like, cool, what already exists in like other popular games. But then some of my classes are like things I actually had to pull from like AD&D or like
Mhm.
other RPGs. Like I don't think there's really a a potion master apothecary type class in
Right, yeah,
popular Dungeons and Dragons. So that's one of my classes that I created where I wanted to have this sort of like traveling. I don't know if you ever played Breath of the Wild. There's like Beetle. He's walking around with that giant backpack of gear, and you just kind of find him. But yeah, that like as a character, but with like their little traveling like apothecary potion set, making stuff for adventures on the road seemed like a cool style of play that I haven't really seen before.
right,
And I think I originally got I pulled some inspiration from Deathbringer actually. I think there was
okay,
something like a plague doctor or something in there that like kind of like sparked the original uh genesis for that character, and then it kind of just evolved from there. But the rest of them are like, you know, your classic barbarian, your druid, your paladin, sorcerer. Um, and as I was kind of mentioning earlier, the biggest challenge was making these classes distinctly different from the 4 core classes that Kelsey
right,
designed for Shadowdark, which is
right.
very challenging.
Yeah, because she does such a good job with those 4 classes, kind of, making them broad enough that you can kind of capture a lot of different player archetypes with just those 4 classes.
Exactly.
But yeah, so you but yeah, I was impressed with the classes you came up with because you even have the knight and the paladin, so there's 2 different, you know, fighter adjacent classes, but yeah, they still feel like the knight and paladin feel unique from each other as well as feeling unique from the fighter, so that was impressive design, I thought.
It was a hard. It was. I also not to like talk myself up, but I also feel that way. I feel like it was impressive design because that was one where I was like, how do I make the paladin and the knight distinctly different? And
Right,
real reality is like, well, paladin has like healing capabilities and like some other cleric type skills, and the knight is like just a fighter who has a mount and is good with armor. And like I think of the knight as like the hound from Game of Thrones, and then like a paladin is like Arthas from Warcraft. And to me, those are two distinct, different
yeah. Yeah, that makes
classes,
sense.
and it works.
Yeah. I also liked like the implied world building that came with the knight. 'Cause you have common mounts that you add to the game, and then uncommon mounts. And as soon as I see that there's a giant frog in the uncommon mount, I'm like, oh, I want to make like a weird halfling knight that rides a giant frog, or like, you know,
Yeah,
it inspires character ideas just with that kind of. It's simple. It's like you don't spell it out like, these are the types of knights in this world, or you don't give like a lot of world building to it, but there's like this implied world building just because now there's a list of uncommon mounts that you can take. I thought that was really cool.
thank you. Yeah, I like what you're saying. The implied world building, like subtly putting some things in there where you're like, well, what is this all about? It's like, what would you like it to be about? Do you want there to be
Right.
frogs that are mountable in your games? And like, go for it. Like, that really helps dive deeper into what kind of setting you want to be playing in. And Shadowdark doesn't really have a full on setting except for the like curse scrolls.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about Into the Shadowlands is because one of the other things that's you included are some alternate rules or additional rules.
The very, very end of Into the Shadowlands, there's like a couple of one of just what is called additional rules that are things that you can kind of throw in and incorporate or scrap if it's not your play style. Things like temporary hit points, which believe it or not, that's from 5e, and I actually think that's a pretty uh, I think it's a pretty cool game design mechanic, honestly. So
Mhm.
some spells allow you to have temporary hit points that are, they're not boosting your maximum HP, but serving as kind of like an additional armor on your character. I think that is a cool way to incorporate that into something like Shadowdark that doesn't have that inherently built in.
Right.
And then I have other things like, just quality of life improvements, like obfuscating how you define armor. In Shadowdark, it's like leather, chainmail, or plate. Um, but as some people like other types of armor. Like if you want to wear a gambeson or like brigandine armor, like that's not technically chainmail. Like you can just call it medium armor or light armor or
Right.
heavy armor, and then it just kind of helps with like explaining your character a little bit more. Other mechanics is like exhaustion. That one is really it's just basically fatigue from Knave. I think it
Hmm.
almost operates like in the exact same way, but that I
That's
shamelessly am just like this is just a mechanic from Knave that I love and think it's great. I'm not
that's
even
right
sure if
because it
it's
takes up a
officially.
gear slot, right?
Yeah, I don't know if Knave did it first or if the Black Hack did it first. I just remember reading about fatigue and people saying like it takes up a gear slot. And in a game like Shadowdark where you have gear slots and you can actually track your
Mhm.
inventory because it's that easy, having a, a consequence that takes up a gear slot is actually it's a great way to like be like, oh shoot, that sucks, and now you have to have your friends carry your gear. So those are some like additional pieces that like I think are welcome additions, at least to my table. And then like there's like one small adjustment for like luck tokens. Rules is written, I think a luck token only allows you to re-roll something. I think
Mhm.
that this other addition is that you can use a luck token to give yourself advantage on a roll. So you can be a bit more proactive with that as opposed to just reacting to failing a spell cast, which is usually how luck tokens get used. This way you can say, I really want this task to succeed. I'm going to use the luck token to give myself advantage. And like that's like also a house rule. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah. So your other question was about.
Yeah, corruption and diseases. Is that like a world building thing for you? Like, is that something that you wanted there because of the campaign style or the world that you play in?
A little bit, yes, and also from what I had mentioned earlier about like I was scrubbing the internet for like other house rules for my own game. Um, some of the classes I had designed for like my hacked version of 5e incorporated this concept of corruption that I was originally inspired from Deathbringer, where
Mhm.
you can like get some corruption. I don't remember what the trigger was, but if you have 10 points of corruption, you're basically just under the control of the GM, and your character is treated as though they're dead. But like you give your character sheet to the GM and they're like, cool, you're fully corrupted. I now control your character. Um, I read that when I was reading Deathbringer, and I'm like, that is such a freaking cool idea. Like you go full like Anakin on the dark side kind of mindset. And I'm like, cool, how can I incorporate that into my classes? So a
Yeah.
couple of my classes have that built in, specifically the sorcerer and the warlock, where if you happen to get that 2 talent roll, you're getting like a big benefit to your character. Um, but part of getting that big boost is you're also gaining corruption, which is a semi-permanent, like negative uh, trait, I suppose is the best way to put it.
Right.
Where it
Yeah.
can kind of be removed. It's just really difficult to remove it. And then of course, there's consequences for having different tiers of corruption. But with the highest tier 3, is permanent, like completely permanent. Like there's no way to get rid of it. but you actually gain a buff, like a passive buff to your character, which is sort of like allows people to kind of lean into the corruption if they want. But after you get
Right.
tier 3, you can't go back. Like there's no way to go back. And then once you get to 10, your character is now under the control of the GM. So I'm excited as a GM because for me, I get to now tempt my players. Hey, if you want this power, you can get it. But once you get it, it's
Right.
only a matter of time before you get more corruption, and then I get to keep your character. And then that just like opens up all of these like world building possibilities of a new big bad and another campaign. And I don't know if you or other people run campaigns like me, but I like to incorporate things from prior campaigns, even if it's like a different
Right.
universe, into my new campaign to be like, oh yeah, this group of adventurers like a long time ago did this thing, and then like reference our last campaign because I know my players get a
Right.
kick out
Yeah.
of that. And some new people will be at the table and be like, what are you talking about? What is this inside thing? They're like, oh, we have lore for you. So yeah,
Yeah, and that gets your players bought into the lore when, like, they are the lore. Like, their old characters created that problem or, you know, those their old characters are that problem, right?
that's some of the inspiration for corruption and why I wanted that because it's an opportunity for a cool storytelling moment, and I like to present those opportunities to my players whenever I can. And I guess one last piece I failed to mention with the corruption is uh, in my worlds, spellcasting is you can get corruption from failing your check with a natural one. So even if you're not playing a sorcerer or a warlock, you could still technically get corruption, or if certain monsters attack you and hit you, you can get corruption, or doing something awful. Like if you yourself like go and murder like I don't know a bunch of people for no reason, like you'll probably get corruption. I'll probably just give it to you.
I don't know if you ever played any of the old Star Wars RPG, but, like, Dark Side Points.
Mm,
The different versions of the Star Wars RPGs over the years, so obviously,
mhm.
you can earn, points in the dark side or, some variation of that mechanic. So,
Yeah,
similar concept, which,
yeah,
having played a bunch of those old Star Wars games over the years, that's definitely something that really does help with, world building and even just story development, right? Because
yeah.
you have a character who's, flirting with the dark side, flirting with corruption, and then they've got so much of it, they're like, "Wait a second, I need to go on a redemption arc here." Or do I?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. And that I think creates interesting storytelling, and those are the stories that my group and friends will be talking about for years to come.
Yeah, I have one of those players who he basically mains warlock. Like, he loves playing a warlock. Occasionally he'll play a sorcerer, but it's
Mhm.
all because he loves flirting with the dark side. Like, that's no matter what no matter what his character's backstory is, they always start to lean towards evil.
So is he more of the is your player the more of the like charisma warlock or more of the intelligence warlock? 'Cause that's another weird thing about Into the Shadowlands is I give the player the option to choose because
Oh, that's
a
cool.
warlock could be like, yeah, they're charismatic and they're trying to negotiate with this higher eldritch power or whatever or god to get their powers. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're actually more of the wizard type and they're inquisitive and they're looking into these things and they're doing research to uncover these secrets and they gain those powers through their intelligence. And it's not necessarily like a bargain made with them. I think that's like one of the interesting tropes of like a warlock is like, oh, they have this relationship with this higher power and they have to talk to them. Like you can do that, but there's other ways to like have relationships with eldritch gods.
Well,
Oh
and of
man.
course, now as soon as you say a warlock with intelligence as their spellcasting stat, I'm thinking of a character with, like, a lawyer background, right? So
Mhm.
they're, like, reading all these, like, evil tomes and, dark magic books, not trying to negotiate in, like, a charisma kinda way. They're looking for loopholes in the system. They're trying to, like, game the laws of magic in order to siphon power,
Yeah.
kinda trying to outsmart the powers that be.
Exactly. And to me, that's such a like a different kind of unique take on the relationship of like a warlock and their deity is like now your character is seen as like trying to take advantage of this deity without getting
Right.
like struck down by them, as opposed to like having it always be you have to appease them or like proactively work together in a positive way. You can actually have more of a conflict kind of with your deity. And
Yeah.
also is like it implies a lot of things for world building. Maybe you find a book somewhere and that book has all of these elder secrets, and that's where you're getting your powers from.
Right, and you could even flavor the corruption in that intelligence, like, direction of hubris, right? Instead of, like, becoming this, like, dark, malevolent, entity, right? It's just pure arrogance. You're just like I'm smarter than this eldritch being. I've got them figured out. And that corruption is like
Yeah,
you you think you know more than you do, and you're just going further down the dark path because you think you're outsmarting this being the whole time, but you're slowly, you know, getting twisted towards their dark magic, right?
exactly. And to me, I
Yeah.
think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, and that, again, that implied world building, like, if you create tools for the game, but you don't specifically say, "This is why these tools exist," it allows the individual game masters and players to interpret those rules and flavor them how they want and use them in their campaign settings in an implied way without explicitly saying, "This class and this subclass is for, this type of world," or if you play an Eldritch Knight, it's your magic comes from this source. Or if you play a Shadow Sorcerer, your magic comes from the Shadowfell. Like without spelling that out, it leaves space for creativity on the
mhm.
individual player and game master. I think that's great. What are you working on currently? Like, do you have any more projects to follow up on Into the Shadowlands? Like, what do you got going on?
I have some of my own things in the works that I'm not quite ready to chat about yet. But that kind of explains some of my absence on YouTube. Is I'm focusing my time on other things right now, and uh, those will be coming soon. One of the main focuses is like, I guess I could share like some details of it. As a creative, for me, it's really hard to separate where my attention is drawn to. Right, I might be like really into this one thing, and like that's what Into the Shadowlands was for me. Like back when I first was writing, I'm like, I'm so motivated to write this document and get it all done and like put it out there. And I did that. It exists. It's now a thing. And since then, I've kind of like shifted my focus onto other things. And like I've been between campaigns a little bit here and there. So I had some more downtime. I have some like other games I play when like we don't have a full group. So I've been doing a lot of Frostgrave, which is a great little like for people who don't know what Frostgrave is. It's like a more casual skirmish game that's like easier to get into than like Warhammer.
Oh yeah,
So we would do
great game.
that with like, yeah, it's super fun. And I played like, I don't even know how many sessions with like one of my best friends. And there's a lot of things we don't like. So we started homebrewing things, and then that led to another thing and led to another thing where now I'm at this point where I'm like, this is no longer serving me. I need to create my own game. So that's really where I've
Nice.
been dedicating a lot of my time is working on my skirmish game, which people who follow me on Patreon probably know all about it because I post about it there. But I'm not quite ready to go public with all of it just yet because there's still some things to work on because I think it's actually really good.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that because I that's my other hobby that's outside of the Dungeons and Dragons stuff is I love skirmish games. Um, so I play Frostgrave and Marvel Crisis Protocol, and
Mm,
my oldest son, who's in his 20s, he's really big into Star Wars Legion, so I played that with him.
cool.
Yeah, I really enjoy
Yeah,
skirmish
you
games.
might like this then, especially if you've ever played Wartime.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you
Yeah.
like
That's about
Wartime,
the only Games Workshop game I'll play.
see, and I played like I think 2 games of Warhammer once, and I'm like, "This is super cool." Also, I don't have the time nor the money nor like it was just a lot of really complex everything,
Right.
and I don't think I would do it again. But reading Wartime, I was like, "Oh, this is like the Warhammer world, but like way more streamlined, kinda like Frostgrave." Like I feel like Frostgrave drew a lot of inspiration from Wartime, and I like
Mhm.
both of those games. So my game has definitely some inspiration from both of them. But my rules light minimalist mindset is like really leading the charge in this game's development.
But yeah, I love skirmish games. So now I'm excited to know that you're working on one. That's really cool.
I'll send you a I'll share the beta with you after this little interview.
Oh, awesome.
You can let me know what
Exciting.
you think.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I'm trying to get people to give me some really critical feedback for it because I really do care about the playtesting aspect and same with the same care and attention that I put into the Shadowlands. I really want to make sure that each aspect has some serious thought and attention going into the core ethos for this game.
that's exciting. Yeah, that's great. And obviously, just to kind of wrap up a little bit here, I totally appreciate what I can tell of your game design through Into the Shadowlands is that it does seem to be very intentional and very thoughtful, and like you can tell that there's a lot of work that's gone into that. And like you said, Shadowdark in and of itself is a great game, so it is hard to design for it. And you've done a fantastic job with Into the Shadowdark, so or Into the Shadowlands. It's a great product. I was excited to look at it and looking forward
Awesome.
to using it in the future for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying all that. I'd love to hear also if you run into things that are like weird with spells. Spells is probably the hardest thing for balancing that, and like the assassin. If you're one of the people who have been keeping up with my adjustments, you'll see that almost every patch there's a change for the assassin, because like Kelsey just made the thief too, like it's just so cut and dry. Like you can't, like I don't even know how you could design an assassin and have it be distinctly different from the thief in a good way. So that's forever going to be my bane, is just figuring that out. But yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. It's great stuff. And do you have anything else that you want to plug before we close here? Is there anything else you're? I feel like we got the big scoop here. It's a skirmish game, so that's really cool.
Yeah, that's the big scoop. I mean, aside from that, like you can find me. Where can you find me? I haven't practiced my spiel on everything, but youtube.com/@housedm. I think it's the @ symbol now. Yeah. I'm pretty active on YouTube. I watch a lot of things. I comment a lot of places, but I used to make only a video once a month. Hopefully that'll pick up more so as I kind of get more into the skirmish stuff and start revealing a lot of that. You can follow me on Patreon. I post pictures and stuff on Instagram, just not as much. Instagram's like not like the best, but you can find me over there. You can message me there if you want to chat. I also get emails all the time. You can always email me. Those are great places to get in touch with me.
Very cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show today, and just definitely enjoyed talking with you and gaming with you at Green Dragon Fest.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
excited to see your new projects, and excited to use them Into the Shadowlands in my Shadowdark game.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Cool. Yeah, and thanks, Brad. Thanks, Brad, for having me on the show.
And thank you for watching all the way until the end. And as always, thanks again for visiting the Dire Den, and I'll see you next time. In the meantime, check out these videos too.